the garden of delights. The white horse neighed and nudged its rider. The sleepy knight opened his eyes and spotted a kobold squirrel scampering between the fallen foliage. The air smelled to fern. Humble sunny September morbidly awaited wicked brother Winter, dressed in its military blue cloak. Rubicon found the walnut-wood gun his father had given him. He stood up and straightened his sword, Sazable, a gift from Owen the magician. Its quillons were adorned by corundums, once the crystallized eyes of a mighty sea dragon. Owen had proclaimed, "These stones will protect you from an almighty evil. Never forget that." The land of Lund was almost in mourning. The old king lay on his deathbed. Queen Lucia was expected to marry, and Rubicon was not in the running, though they had been clandestine lovers for months. Hence, he was on this not-too-merry ride into death, sent by Lucia to the Felucca forest to secure the most treasured prize in history. She would stall her marriage for 1 month. There were no detailed maps of the forest. It was a feared domain steeped in ancient evil. A myriad of horrors awaited Rubicon. As he saddled his horse, a twisting light caught the ruby stones and threw out a signal of colour. They began with a trot and entered the bells of the forest. The musty air was bathed with a scent unknown to Rubicon. Slowly he felt giddy, and landmarks became mere fleeting images. The trees changed shape, stretching out to form towering crucified bodies rising from the ground. Elated, all encounters with evil were dashed from his mind. His horse gained speed, and as the forest thinned, they entered a huge field of poppies in bloom. The night was drawing in, and seeing another hearse ahead, Rubicon decided to rest. He was hot and sticky. His chainmail and jupon were clinging to his skin. He wanted to undress and lay his naked body on the violet coat of heather. Then he noticed to his left a pond. Suddenly a whip cracked and a venomous bolt of lightning struck the 2 nearby trees, which burst into a jet of flames. Thunder strode across the angry sky, and a hot rain scalded his skin. As the heather ignited, the bonny forest became a vile consternation. Rubicon stared back at the poppy field and saw a nightmare come alive as those previous harmless flowers were being transformed into a slow-moving army of rotting corpses. Limbless knights still clad in their bloody, bedraggled armor. Above, vultures patiently waited for another snack to fall. Glazed with grief, he started to lose control. Trying to regain his senses, he went towards the pool. A sickness twisted in his stomach. How could he fight this battalion of diseased and depleted knights? What power now possessed them? He looked into the pond, and below its surface there existed another world. Dumbfounded, he gazed as if into a crystal ball unto a kingdom decorated by sad, decrepit weeds and spineless trees forsaken of leaves. The drab courtiers were dressed in peculiar garments, looking like paupers trapped in a forlorn court. Shaking his head, Rubicon closed his eyes and threw water onto his face. Its coolness revived his hope that he had imagined everything. But no, he was an onlooker into the daily happenings of a strange piazza. The water rippled as a furry object swam towards him. It was a talking water vole.
Be careful, silly soldier. Oh no, you're not another twitchy type, are you?
Rubicon remembered the army of dead soldiers. He turned, and they had vanished. Was he going insane?
No. You weren't imagining them. Queen Fetish is a lady of great imagination and style.
Have you always been able to talk?
What a bilious question. Your horse could converse if you coxcombs didn't force it to be done.
What's down below in the underwater city?
That, my dear, is the royal kingdom of Fetish. Are you another hoping to nab the treasure and return its magic to your own kingdom?
Rubicon hoped that this tiny cretin might, if persuaded carefully, inform him of his actual mission. Treasure? What piffle! I am searching for a beautiful young maiden who entered this forest and was never seen again. Perhaps I should enquire below.
Man, are you really so yellow-bellied? Erroneous romantic load of nonsense. Why don't you go and search for the world's most treasured, precious.
My dear Vole, what could be more precious than real love?
No, you ninny. I am talking about the crown she stole from King Arch. Tell me you don't know about that story, and I'll tell you what I think of modern education. She was his mistress until the coronation day, when he chose another bride. In revenge, Lady Fetish stole one of the two ancient crowns, the queen's, naturally, and was exiled. After declaring herself the queen of the Garden of Delights, there was a rivalry and war unequaled in history. But complete magic comes only when the crowns are reunited. Eventually, that meddling magician Owen banished her domain beneath this pond, and those tree men were Fetish's protection from prying idiots. Of course, Our Lady often escapes. Maybe she's the one you so wretchedly seek.
Why, you tantalizing tout, you must pocket a mighty commission. So, tell me, how do I reach their gateways?
Just take a dive. I wish you all the best of the worst, because you are certainly the most interesting specimen I have met for many a wonderful year. Farewell, night.
And he swam, strapped his gun across his back, and breathing deeply, dived into the water. He knew that he would not have to strip, for he was entering an enchanted pool. Slowly the water whirled around him, causing him to spin. Flashbacks of his life dashed before his eyes until his feet touched ground, and before him lay two lazy dragons. His hands rested on Sazabla as he walked on the cobblestones. Above there was just sky. Or traces of water had been eliminated. The snoring sentinels didn't notice the trespasser boldly walk up to the gates. The quadrangled courtyard was, once upon a time, the rendezvous for an ensemble of hideous monsters. Now, only dust balls and insects exchanged diary dates. There were no soldiers. The cannons were rusty and in disrepair. He smelt that same sickly scent he had encountered in the forest. It was like rotting strawberries. He sauntered across the grassy yard and spotted a bent-over figure looking like an upright rat. It was carrying a large and cumbersome bundle of scrolls and looked rather fetching in this desolate scene. Rubicon decided to ask this elderly academic for directions. "Excuse me, sire." The whiskered creature turned and wiggled his nose, puzzled by the knight's address. Rubicon would be considered the evil one here. He must take care. "Sorry, I'm lost and trying to find the Queen's chambers." After the rat dubiously surveyed the young man, he placed the scrolls onto the ground and searched inside his large, dark coat. Finally, a feather and an ink bottle appeared. He wore shoes of variegated leather. He unscrewed the top, dipped the quill into the fluid, and wrote on one of the scrolls. Rubicon read to himself, "Greetings. I am Mr. Rat, and am unfortunately dumb. The Queen forbade me to speak. I can assist you with your journey, but not to the main hall, for she has planned a festival celebrating her birthday and the king's death, and I am not invited." He felt sick. The king was dead, and the clock was ticking. He could not believe that he had met such a nice person in this Cimmerian place. He felt sorry for Mr. Rat. Rubicon bent over to pick up the scrolls. Indeed, they were heavy, and the paper crackled. The rat wrote, "If you are a visitor, as I suspect, then take care, for her emissaries are everywhere." Rubicon wondered if the water vole had already sent on his message. Mr. Rat's brisk pace soon brought them to a high door covered in a mossy yellow spider's web. He scribbled, "You take these spiral stairs to the top, go left, and enter a room full of doors. Here is the concealed entrance to her inner kingdom, but beware of any bizarre signs. Follow your instincts, and good luck." Rubicon was bathed in pity. Mr. Rat waved goodbye and scurried away into the darkness, his tail being heard long after he'd been swallowed by the swallow. Rubicon stared at the lofty ceiling and thought about good and evil. So, she had created a protective world within a world. Ha! She was a clever bitch, this witch. This incantation would keep those primeval jewels in her hands. He pictured her autocracy over this palace as an enormous outstretched hand, its palm full of poisoned veins. At the top of the stairs, he turned left and walked through a gloomy passageway. Adjacent, a labyrinth of abandoned corridors tempted the Inquisitor to joust with death. The palace was massive. He decided to put faith into Mr. Rat. What could he lose? Eventually, he stood in front of the room of doors and entered the pallid painted room. Its scarlet ceiling was decorated with gold ogee mouldings and was lit by a torch-like lantern which cast fearsome shadows. On both sides there were 5 doors. In the room's center was a carved oak table with 3 attached mirrors and a bronze Ashmorean couch. Each door was identical, and Rubicon opened the one nearest him. Gradually, he turned its brass handle and peered into a small room occupied by a gaunt woman spinning thread. This was a corrupt hallucination of Lucia trying to entice him into the room. He slammed the door to. Queen Fetish was not just another sundry monster, for she delved into the enemy's mind. Rubicon had to succumb to the potency of his foe's sorcery, which enabled her to invoke intangible incarnations. He opened the second door to see a saturated field piled high with writhing bodies trapped within a ring of fire. These desperate wretches clawed, bit, or beat the next body down. It was a chimney to hell. Their screams were unbearable, as was the nauseous stench of defecation and sweat. Distressed, he went to shut the door, but somehow a hand curled around the frame and grabbed hold of his leg. After a heave, the brittle hand snapped away and turned into black ash. He ran to the couch, wanting to vomit. Her vile power was growing as his was diminishing. As he clenched his fists, he spotted another slithery hand edging towards him. From underneath the 4th door, he saw a light, and darting the hand's clutches, he audaciously opened it. He stood in a throne room glittering with splendor. It was the tallest room he had ever seen. The 6 enormous pillars supporting the roof had a living Brobdingnagian serpent twisting around it. He turned, and like the poppy field, the room of doors had vanished. He walked into a grotesque crowd. The room was a clutter of unruly mutterings. The ugly ladies all had tallow, elongated faces with indifferent lips. He felt a great unease. A gong sounded, and the room came to a standstill. Everywhere there was the swishing of capes and tails as everybody started to kneel. He complied. As each head was ceremoniously pressed against the bloodstone floor, he heard a shrill voice booming from above. He took a peek and saw an enormous figure. It was the queen of the underworld talking to her flatterers. Yeah, she was a sensual nymph in nylons. On her head sat the infamous orb of her magic. As the stones dazzled, she spoke.
Good evening, you worthy band of sinners. Tonight, we celebrate a double pleasure. My friends from above have informed me of the king's death. Yes, finally not even Owen could combat my magic. This was a delectable delicacy for my birthday. A treat I'll not forget. So, make your way to the golden room of contentment and enjoy the debauched star-studded show.
And she disappeared with not a puff of smoke to see. Followed the masses. What was she babbling about? The theatre room was decorated by statuesque black ivy pillars. He sat near the back. As the curtains opened, the audience gasped on seeing a strangely lopsided spinet and two harpies. These revolting and rapacious monsters were half bird, half woman. Rubicon heard what sounded like a collection of dancers warming up. How wrong he was. For then entered the infernal scarlet spider, whose strength doubled after consuming human flesh. He was an undisputed legend in his own lifetime. Rubicon's agitation grew on seeing this loathsome arachnid, even if handsomely attired in a purple cape. The spider sat before his instrument and was joined by 4 equally unnatural musicians. First to arrive, clutching a horn, was the Green Serpent, followed by 2 notoriously obese hares called Bramble and Tremble. But the most piquant of the quintet was the Tree Man, once called Diane, a prince in the royal lineage who became a hermit and declared the king unfit for the throne.